Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto was the son of the Greek gods? Part -5. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. Wow! Shouted all the demigods in the room memorized by the display of grace and speed shown by Naruto. Even the two hunters had to agree his speed was impressive event to a hunter like themselves. However, he could not jump out of the way like before. He imitated Naruto and jumped upward and went farther than usual somehow. Wonder how he did that as he couldn't chakra like Naruto. Those are demigod powers, young goading. Hestia smiled warmly at the demigods. He turned his attention back to the bull because it had impacted the tree, one of its horns stuck on it. Is that what happened to you? Questioned Nico. His gaze went to the son of Poseidon. He nodded his head but his gaze went to the scene below him to the fight. Ares just grinned happily because nothing, and I mean nothing, made him excited than to watch a good fight. Naruto smirked as he created a swirling ball of energy in his hands and shouted, "There was a reason I never showed you this before." Rasengan. Kushina eyes went to Hades and shouted out, "That's your technique." Hades looked shocked and the other gods and goddesses looked interested at the new development. He slammed the ball into the side of the creature. As if that would wound the Minotaur, laughed Ares. You would be surprised, smirked Kushina. Ares glared at her but thought, she is going to get it soon. Ares snarled out, if you think you knew it all then I challenge you to a fight. Kushina smiled and bowed her head then said, I accept your challenge. Aphrodite and Hades were silently worried for the safety of Kushina. Aphrodite because she was her precious daughter. Hades on the other hand was worried about his wife from the book. Ares laughed and said, as if you could beat me. Kushina snarled at him and said, fine after this chapter then. You're lose girly, said Ares. Enough, continue reading Kushina, thundered Zeus. She nodded her head and started. It flew a few feet away at an odd angle because when it did, its horn broke off. Thou thinks thee has a powerful weapon, said Zoe looking at the image of Naruto on the throne room's floor. Percy quickly ripped it out, hoping to use it as a makeshift weapon. Naruto was about to tell him not to bother with until he saw the Minotaur getting back up. Young goading, you have to use celestial bronze, Hestia smiled at the image before her. Looking in horror, they saw the huge hole in the gut of the beast but it seemed to be healing up quickly. Wow! Shouted out he demigods in the room. Thinking how cool it would be to have Charka like Naruto and Kushina. Before they do anything however, it charged at them again. No! Exclaimed Kushina, tears rolling down her face, worried about her son getting to safety. The immortals and demigods in the room just stared transfixed at the image below them. They couldn't speak, just watch the scene in wonder and a little bit of fear. It swung at Percy and sent him a few feet away, knocking the air out of him. That's gotta hurt, said the demigods. It did the same to Naruto but he rolled with the blow so it would not do as much damage. Smart, remarked Athena with a glint in her cloudy gray eyes. Jumping back at it, he activated the seal on his pants, took out a kunai, channeled chakra to it, and sliced the remaining horn off, making it cry out in rage. The boy is not a common male, is he, milady? Questioned Zoe. Artemis just nodded her head, agreeing with one of her oldest friends. Seeing that Percy was getting back up, he thought quickly. Normal attacks don't do a lot of damage but it does have a nasty scar from my Rasengan. Fight fight fight, screamed Ares. The other people in the throne room just shot Ares a dirty look. Zoe scowled and snarled, a perfect example of a disgusting male. Ares' face turned red with anger and was about to kill the hunter but a silver arrow missed by a hair length. He looked around the throne room for the culprit and found Artemis glaring at him with fury and hate in her silver eyes. Ares backed down instantly because you do not want to go against a pissed off Artemis. Maybe it doesn't heal all the way, what if using its horns will work? He then stabbed the horn into the old wound and twisted harshly. It cried out in agony when he did that, and it seemed that it was not healing at all. The power of the mythical world, dear, smiled Hera. The gods and demigods in the room looked at Hera as if she sported two heads. Or that she was fine with Zeus' affairs. He quickly jumped over it and on its back, stabbing it in the neck. Percy. Stab for the heart. The heart. Good, think, punk, aim for a viral organ, nodded Ares. Athena just nodded her head, glaring at Ares with distaste for agreeing with him. He yelled out, struggling to stay on. Percy seemed to get the idea and quickly ran up to it, avoiding the massive flailing arm that were trying to get Naruto off of it. The room held their breath, waiting what would happen next. He stabbed it hard and it cried out before it burst into the same crap Mrs. Dodds did. Yeah, they did it, screamed the demigods while the gods and goddesses smiled. The two hunters just glared at the two boys in the image on the floor because boys were pigs and hurtful to women. Even Artemis was smiling at the scene before her, but Zoe vowed that she would not fall for the boys' tricks. Kushina continued in a happy voice, thinking Naruto is safe and sound. The scene of the image disappeared into the regular throne room floor. Collapsing to his knees, he felt the rush of adrenaline wore off and the feeling of losing his mother was starting to crash down on him. Poor dear, sadly said Hestia and Hera. Naruto picked up Percy. They opposed each other until they got to Grover. Come on, we gotta get to that house, we won't be out of the woods until we do. Always be cautious, said Annabeth and Athena simultaneously. Naruto said as he threw Grover over his shoulder while the two demigods supported each other as the rain has suddenly stopped. Of course, make your nephews fight harder for them, scowled Poseidon and Hades. Zeus just glared at his elder brothers. When they got to the pouch, Naruto fell to his knees and it seemed that Percy was barely conscious. Hey Percy, you need to get into shape, joked Nico. Percy looked at his younger cousin and stuck out his tongue at him. Talia just shook her head and muttered, boys. The two hunters just beamed at Talia, but Zoe was the only one who caught her silver circlet on her head. Her dark volcanic eyes widened and sighed to herself. Kushina started again once the room quieted down. The weight of the two in the battle was just now getting to him. I am weak. I have not fought in a long time. That's all right, sweetheart, you can train when you are at camp, replied Kushina. Persephone just smiled, thinking, Kushina isn't that bad to deal with, but dismissed the thought. Kushina started again and couldn't wait for her fight with Ares after this chapter. Looking up, he saw the familiar face of Mr. Brunner, who was giving them a serious look. He also a very pretty blonde-haired girl, whose hair looked curled like a princess's. One of them has to be it, they just have to. The girl said. Annie, sung Talia. Annabeth blushed and mocked glared at Talia saying, don't call me that. Talia and Thal smiled but waved it off. Silence, Annabeth, Mr. Brunner said. They're still conscious. Bring them inside. Yes, they would be very helpful if you don't mind. Smartass, thought everyone in the room. Naruto replied weakly, catching them off guard. Going inside, Naruto helped the girl named Annabeth put Percy and Grover on different cots in the room. So thoughtful, gushed Aphrodite. My name is Annabeth Chase, by the way. Oh my gosh, you are so cute, Annabeth dear, smiled Aphrodite. The girl said with a small smile. Naruto cracked his back and said with a weak smile, Naruto Uzumaki, and if you don't mind, I am about to lose consciousness. Well, that's unexpected, smiled Apollo. Hermes nodded his head in agreement while high-fiving his half-brother. Annabeth had wide eyes as she watched him put his back to the cot and say, good night. Before falling down, out like a light. So my children will make an appearance, hopeful, said all the gods and goddesses besides Artemis, Hera, and Hestia. Still never ceases to amaze me. Yeah, Naruto, Percy, and Grover is an amazing guys, smiled Thals. Mr. Brunner suddenly said, making the girl jump. Which one? All three. They protected each other in that school I went to. Naruto seems to be a natural fighter though. Of course, smiled Kushina. He replied, but considering where he from, I am not surprised. Where? Oh, I am sure he will tell you and the rest of the camp later. So even Chiron knows as well, said all the gods and goddesses. Come and get me when one of them wakes. Mr. Brunner said as he left. Now Annabeth was even more curious. You're always curious, Annie, smirked Talia. Annabeth blushed and looked away from everyone so no one can see her blush. 4x. Naruto woke up with a start as he bolted up in the bed he was in. I wonder if Naruto's children will have advanced healing, questioned Athena. Kushina nodded her head and said, it is a family bloodline, so yes, they will have it. Everyone looked shocked and Athena and Annabeth wanted to know more about the Uzumaki bloodline. That scared the crap out of Annabeth, who had just walked in. Ah, don't do that. Hey, sorry, Naruto said while scratching the back of his head. He looked at the horn he was still holding and then to Percy, who was still out of it. He brought a hand up to his chin and said, so all of that crap did happen. Language, honey, sighed Kushina. The goddesses just smiled at Kushina and agreed with her wholeheartedly. Yep, sighed Annabeth. I still can't believe you two were able to kill that monster. Why so surprised, Annie? Questioned Talia. Annabeth sighed and shouted out, don't call me that. Talia just grinned at her and said, no way. Annabeth just groaned and pouted. Kushina smiled at the interaction but continued on. Naruto smirked and said, believe it. Anyway, knowing that names have power around here, I will just call it the Bull Freak on steroids. Ha 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 ha, I can't get over that name, laughed Apollo and Hermes. Annabeth stared at Naruto for a long time, making him a bit uncomfortable, until she let out a laugh, which was followed by another laugh from Mr. Brunner. Naruto does have humor, screamed out both Apollo and Hermes. Apollo said, I will take on Naruto as my apprentice. Thal shook her head rapidly then said, oh no you won't, because another one of Naruto's girlfriend will kill you slowly and painful. Aphrodite shouted out excitedly, my grandson has more than one girlfriend. Thals just nodded her head and smiled. Zoe just huffed then said hateful, thou should have known that thee are a perfect example of a male. Everyone besides Artemis and Phoebe looked surprised at this revelation. Good to see you again, old man. Naruto commented. Before Annabeth could correct him, Mr. Brunner chuckled and said, Naruto, here I am called Chiron. Properly going to have a smartass comment about a horse, smirked Hermes. The look on Naruto was priceless. He was still smiling but he had the, oh shit, smile. Oh, so where is your horse half? I knew it, screamed out Hermes. Everyone shouted back, no one doubted you. Hermes then rubbed the back of his head and laughed at himself. This is a magical wheelchair to when I want to go out, I use this to hide my true self. The now dubbed Chiron replied. Oh, that makes sense. So, how long was I out? You just got here last night. That is why I said you shouldn't even be up. Annabeth said. Wow, that is awesome, impressive, shouted out the demigods with the gods and goddesses. Oh, well, I have always been a really fast healer. I thought it was because of the fox. Nope, your bloodline, sweetheart, smiled Kushina. But, he trailed off as he saw Annabeth gave him a look of confusion while Chiron had a serious look on his face. I take it you have no clue what I am talking about. Pretty much, muttered Annabeth. Percy and Nico gasped then said, there is something wise girl Annabeth doesn't know. Annabeth blushed then screamed, shut up. No, the blonde girl said. Yeah, we were right for once against Annabeth, said Percy and Nico. I have an idea. Fox is known as the Kyuubi, correct? Chiron asked. Why yeah, how do you know about that in this world? Because Chiron is awesome, smiled Annabeth. Naruto asked with narrowed eyes while Annabeth looked even more confused. Huh, I would never see the day that wise girl over here would looks confused, said Percy with a grin directed at her. Shut up, seaweed brain, blushed Annabeth. I hear things when I got to the annual meets of the gods. Some speak about going to a world that the Lord of the Dead banished the beast known as the Kraken to. Wait, isn't the Kraken the most feared and powerful sea monster throughout history? Questioned Percy. Poseidon nodded his head and said, "It can match Taihan in strength, but luckily for us they have never teamed up." "So where is the Kraken then?" questioned the demigods. "It is at the bottom of the sea just east of the Sea of Monsters with celestial bronze chains holding each of its tentacles and arms down," said Poseidon. "Do you think anything can break it free?" asked Percy. Poseidon shook his head and Percy asked why. "Because there are about half my army guarding or patrolling around that blasted creature. Besides, no one knows where the most feared sea monster is and if all sea life avoid that cavern." "But father," replied Percy. But Poseidon just sighed and said, "Not even Oceanus, the titan of the oceans, can control the Kraken's son." Percy looked surprised, but Poseidon waved him off and said, "Let Kushina read again, then maybe later we will talk again." Percy nodded his head and focused on the book again. Kushina started again. "Though it may be long gone thanks to a man called the Six-Path Sage, it's remained. They were known as the tailed beasts and the Kyubi was the strongest of them all." Chiron explained. "They even spoke of people who were forced at birth to hold these beasts in their bodies via a seal, and you were one of them. They're called power of a human sacrifice or Jinchurakis," sighed Kushina. "Yeah, so what of it?" Naruto asked. "Only a demigod can handle the power of the Kyubi within their body, but not any old demigod, no, a child of the big three, or one's descendants." "That nice to know, so that means Kushina is a descendant of one of the big three then," answered Athena. Kushina blushed and said, "It's Poseidon." Poseidon smiled at one of his descendants while Percy smiled at having a too many great niece, Kushina, and her son Naruto. "Though I have a feeling that it is Poseidon's handiwork," Hades said in chapter 19 in Prince of the Underworld. "You are in the same boat as Percy." "No, he is not," stated Thales. "If you are indeed a child of the big three, then one of you has to decide the fate of the world at a later time, as said in a prophecy of the oracle." "He's not interested," yelled out Thales and Kushina. Naruto held up a hand for him to stop. "I am not interested, nor do I want to decide the fate of the world. If what you say is true, then I will leave it to Percy. He is a good kid, I am sure he will do the right thing." "He is and did," whispered Annabeth. "As for me deciding that, well, as an old friend says, it is way too troublesome." "A Nara clan member," laughed Kushina. "I see. Just know that the prophecy says the time will come when the demigod is 16, so we have time." Chiron replied. "Stop trying to manipulate my son, you old horse," snarled out Kushina. Naruto's eyes widened and he inwardly groaned before saying, "Well, nothing is set in stone." "That's right," smiled Thales, thinking about what happened with the prophecy with Zoe. He then tried to get up but felt kind of weak. "Great. One major fight and I am out. I need to get back in shape. That is what camp is for," said the demigods. He then thought back to what Chiron said. "Hey, if I am a kid of the big three, whose am I?" "Hades." Kushina looked at her husband and blushed, then quickly looked away. Hades smirked and thought having Kushina being his second wife wouldn't be a bad thing. Persephone smiled and made a mental note to have a talk with Kushina later. "We have an idea, but we must keep quiet until they claim you. Besides, being one of the big three's kids is kind of bad." Chiron stated. "Why?" "Because they swore an oath after World War II that they would not have kids anymore." "Which Poseidon and Daddy broke it," said Thales. The gods and goddesses along with the demigods looked confused because didn't Hades break it when he sired Naruto? Annabeth answered for him. Naruto snorted. "Well, we can see how that worked out." "Yes, we can," hissed out Hera, looking at Zeus murderously, which Zeus flinched and backed away from. "Yes," Chiron smirked. "Annabeth, will you please get some ambrosia and nectar? I wonder what it tastes like for him," questioned the everyone in the room besides Kushina and Thales. "It should help him recover faster." As she left, he noticed Naruto looking at him oddly. "It is the food of the gods. Normal human can't eat it or they will die. Painful, but oh, if only the demigods would do that so that I could leave that ghastly camp," grinned Dionysus. The other gods and goddesses glared at the god of wine in disgust. Dionysus waved his hand and ignored the glares from everyone, then said, "You can read tomato." Kushina's face went crimson red with rage and made a mental note to prank him later because no one calls her tomato and lives. So she continued anyways, but in the back of her mind plotting her revenge against anyone who calls her tomato. Demigods eat it because it helps them recover and it is good for them. Very good for you, drooled Apollo and Hermes. Artemis shook her head and muttered, "Man. Ah." Naruto's smart reply was, "Oh, and I almost forgot. These are yours now, use them wisely." "Wait, what are they?" questioned an excited Nico. "We don't know yet." Death breathed, sighed Talia. Chiron said as he took out those familiar lucky charms of his. "Oh, they would look so badass if I had them," chuckled Ares. Everyone just sighed and tried to ignore the war god but failed. "Taking them?" Naruto asked. "So these actually turn into those blades I was using at the museum?" "Yes, and they each hold half of the Kraken's power, so please be careful." "Oh, Mother Rhea, that is a powerful weapon," shuddered all the gods and goddesses in the room. "Huh, your father had the smith god forge them from its raw power." "Hades, you gave your son a very powerful weapon," screamed Zeus. All the gods and goddesses muttered, "Drama queen," that thankfully Zeus didn't hear or they would be hearing him nag them for hours. "Oh," Naruto as he took the bracelets and put them on. Then Annabeth came in with the bowl of some golden liquid. "A sip of heaven," sighed the males in the room. Shrugging as it was better than nothing, he took an bite and tasted an all too familiar taste. Could it be? Was he right about it after all? It tastes just like cheeseburgers, shouted out Talia and Thals while grinning at each other. "Blue chocolate chip cookies," smiled Percy. "Ramen," exclaimed Kushina. "Ichiraku's ramen. Ha 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 ha, I knew it," smiled Kushina. He yelled out with anime tears, making Annabeth take a step back at his suddenly loud voice that didn't even wake up Percy. "Wow, I am surprised that it didn't wake up Percy," said Thals. Chiron just chuckled nervously. "So how do you feel?" Chiron asked. "Badass," grinned Thals. Like I could fight Zabuza Momochi, demon of the bloody mist, and come out on top." Naruto said as he got up. He noticed he still had his kunai pouch on and put the horn in it and seal it all back up, making Annabeth's eyes go wide. Like they did in the throne room along with her mother. "What the?" she let out. Naruto looked at her oddly before saying, "Seals, very useful." "Indeed," Chiron commented with a smirk. "No, even this Chiron news about seals," wailed Athena. Kushina stopped reading, then grinned and said, "I guess I could teach you." Athena with Annabeth and all the other occupants' eyes brightened considerable. Athena and Annabeth shouted out, "When?" Kushina smiled and said, "How about after I kick Mr. War God's butt in our fight?" They nodded their heads instantly and their eyes brightened even more. The Athena and her daughter thought hopeful she wins quickly, so she can teach us. Now I will have a camper show you the cabin for later. "I wonder who it is," questioned everyone in the room. "Then you come back here. When Percy wakes up I will tell more about this, as I don't want to say this twice. He's so smart, but with Percy here you have to say things twice or more anyways before he will gets it," joked the demigods. "Fair enough." Naruto as he follow him out the door. "Annabeth, please continue to watch Percy, please." "Ah, they look so cute together," squealed Aphrodite. The others in the room cringed at the love goddess squeal. "Please Kushina, read please," groaned the males in the room. Chiron ordered while the girl nodded, still wondering about those seals. Once outside, Naruto raised an eyebrow. This place was pretty big. He looked around to see that the hill with the pine tree was not far from them. "Ah, he knows where his girlfriend is at," sighed Aphrodite. Thals blushed and gave a small smile, but Zeus looked murderous. He felt odd looking at it, like he was being pulled towards it. "That's love or my doing, my precious grandson," whispered Aphrodite. The two hunters and Artemis glared at the love goddess. But Aphrodite was too into the book to care or even see them. He shook the feeling off for the moment and looked ahead to see a bunch of cabins in a U-shaped arc. Chiron, not noticing Naruto's small distraction, called out to he saw a girl walking by, Clarice. Come here please. Oh, he is done for, laughed Nico and Percy. Thalls just smirked at them and said, you want to bet on it? They did and said, we will give you 10 drachmas. Thalls just grinned evilly that sent shivers down the two boys' backs, but they shook on it to finalize the deal. The girl turned her head and saw Chiron and one of the new guys everyone was talking about. She smirked and walked over. Properly going to be the welcome committee, smiled Percy thinking about what he did to her when she tried to dunk his head into the toilet. Naruto noticed that she was pretty tall, strong looking, and probably a year or two older than him. Is he checking out Clarice? Said a shocked Percy Jackson. She was not totally ugly. Ah, my grandson is going to be a heartbreaking when he grows up, I am so proud, cried Aphrodite. She looked gruff and had the look of a fighter. Well duh kid, she is my child, sneered Ares. What? Came her response when she arrived. She is straightforward, whispered Kushina while Thalls nodded her head. I would like for you to show Naruto here around the cabins for the moment. I will probably have Annabeth show Naruto and Percy around camp later when the latter wakes up. Chiron stated. Chiron, I don't think that is wise, commented Annabeth. Everyone looked at her strangely. She sighed and said, well, Clarice is not so polite and one of the meaner children of Ares in camp. The others in the throne room just nodded their heads and now got what the daughter of Athena was saying. Fine. Gotta welcome the newbie anyway. She said with an evil smirk. Yeah, fight, 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 encouraged Ares. Naruto raised an eyebrow as that. He knew that smirk, he used it when he did a prank. He guessed the she was welcoming committee. You got it, grumbled Percy. Annabeth whispered, at least she didn't dunk your head in the toilet. Well, come on, brat, she called out, already walking away. He followed her all the way to the middle of the arc of cabins. Okay, listen closely because I am only going to say this once. There are 12 cabins in all. Each one represents a Greek god it was made for. Their kids are the one who live in there. Since you and the runt are new and have not been claimed yet, you two will go to cabin 11, the Hermes cabin. That's cruel for the other gods and goddesses, answered Kushina. The others in the room thought about it and agreed with her. They silently vowed that it would change soon. Naruto nodded. Hermes did shelter a lot of people, so it made sense. And the one you're in? He asked nonchalantly. The god of war's cabin. Go cabin 5 go, screamed an excited Ares. She proclaimed while pointing to a red cabin. I hate that cabin and properly Naruto does too, grumbled Percy. Cool. Naruto replied. No, you corrupted my friend, joked Percy. Artemis glared at him and hissed out, great, another Apollo. The others laughed and Percy just blushed and looked away from the glaring goddess of the moon. Right, now we have the other cabins. We got Demeter, Dionysus, Athena, Apollo, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Hera, Zeus, Artemis and Poseidon. She said pointing to each. He looked at Zeus and Hera's and quirked an eyebrow. They got some pretty fancy cabins for nobody to use. He noticed that a Hades cabin was not there. Yeah, blame your uncles for that, hissed out Hades while glared at his brothers. Poseidon and Zeus looked anywhere but Hades because they were slightly ashamed for isolating Hades' children from camp. Nico wanted to tell his father that there was a Hades cabin along with the minor gods and goddesses but remained silent. In case that it happened differently in the book's dimension. Odd since he was part of the big three. He also noticed a big space between Poseidon's and Zeus's cabins. Maybe they planned on making one and forgot since they never got any kids from Hades. Now, it is not to, officially, welcome you. Of course, sighed Percy. Clarice called out, making a lot of people look toward them and they grimaced. That's my girl, smiled Ares. Does that happen a lot? Questioned Athena. The demigods nodded their head and Athena along with the females in the room just growled. Clarice has changed, said Thalls. Percy looked shocked and questioned, what do you mean? Well, never mind, you will see in the books, shuddered Thalls. Kushina, please continue, smiled Thals while Kushina smiled then nodded her head. Clarice was breaking in another newbie. Even though Naruto helped in killing the Minotaur, they felt sorry for him. As do we, said everyone in the room besides Ares with frowns on their faces. Ares just smiled and thought, that's my girl. She quickly reacted out and tried to grab him by the collar. Key word here is tried. Way to go Naruto, said Annabeth and Percy. They blushed and then looked away from each other. While Athena glared at the sea spawn and muttered, stupid sea spawn, stay away from my daughter. She along with everyone else gasped as he grabbed a log of wood. Kushina giggled to herself and thought, yup just like me. Stumbled, fell to one knee. What the hell? Yup that sounds like Clarice to me, Percy nodded his head. Annabeth sighed and said, seaweed brain that is Clarice. Percy blushed and said, oh. She screamed in her head. Before she could get up, she felt cold metal against her neck. The throne room was silent until Ares started to scream out, why that no good punk I should. Everyone sighed and looked at Kushina to start reading so they didn't have to listen to Ares, complaining. Kushina smiled and continued because after this chapter she was going to kick Ares' ass. She glanced to the right to see Naruto was facing the other way she was and looked at her from his side and with a smirk on his face, similar to her evil one earlier. He could get mistaken for a child of Ares, said Athena. Kushina looked insulted and shouted, if you think I would fall for Ares you got another guess coming. The demigods laughed at Kushina's response while Ares started to glare at Kushina. For someone born from war, you have slow reflexes. Why that punk? Sneered Ares. Kushina snarled and hissed out, that punk has a name you know and he is my son. Naruto said releasing a small bit of killer intent while still smirking. They heard a lot of people asking others how he did that and to Clarice of all people. No one can even dream of do that to Clarice, Percy envious said. While the demigods just nodded their heads awestruck by what Naruto did. Some noticed that he had his kunai pouch on and that he didn't have that before. Ninja badass, grinned Hermes. Deciding to scare them, he withdrew his kunai from her neck, put it in his pouch, sealed it away, earning a few gasps of shock as it just disappeared. With that he could be one of the most popular boys at camp, said Annabeth. Percy looked at Annabeth questionable but shook his head and thought, girls are too complicated. He shocked them even more as he stepped back and offered a hand to help Clarice up. Such a gentleman I will definitely screw up his love life because that what a good grandma does, smiled Aphrodite. Everyone in the room just looked at Aphrodite confused. They were all wondering how in Tartarus name did she come to that conclusion. While that was happening Clarice was in deep shock. The hell, I have never been bested like that. No you have not. Because Naruto is a ninja in both cases of being a badass and an actual ninja, giggled Thals. She then noticed the hand quickly took it. She nodded her head and they walked back to the big house where Naruto came out of. Along the way, she was thinking deeply. Don't strain yourself, joked Percy. Annabeth whacked him on the head because she said, he is being an idiot. Artemis smiled at the daughter of Athena and wondered if she would be interested in joining the hunt. But filed it for later. She looked at the couple again then came to the realization that they were properly together. She then sighed and muttered, Aphrodite will have a heyday for this. He could be an Ares kid. But he isn't and never will be, snarled Kushina. If he is not I am not sure what else he could be. He beat me and could have killed me with me knowing it. What is this odd feeling? Love's in the air, smiled Aphrodite. Percy shuddered. That can't be Clarice can it? Ares glared at the son of Poseidon but before he could say anything Kushina continued on. Arriving at the big house, Chiron saw that Naruto looked bored and Clarice looked a little lost. That is love for you completely useless, hissed out Artemis. Her two hunters just nodded their heads agreeing with their mistress. Aphrodite looked scandalized but Artemis paid her no mind. He had a feeling something went wrong with her. Welcome, plan and wait, could see that she was developing a crush for the blonde. That's exactly it, squealed Aphrodite. Gods, I feel so sorry for him. Who knew Chiron could be funny, said Apollo and Hermes. We do too, said the demigods. Expect Thales and Kushina. At any rate, he was probably going to be hearing what happened from the other campers. Elementary. My dear Watson, Naruto of course being a badass, so you will be hearing about Naruto quite often, and of course we are reading about him, came Apollo. Artemis looked at her twin with confusion on her face. Apollo then said, I thought it would sound good. Quote, Artemis got up from her throne and started banged her head on the wall while muttering, stupid, stupid, stupid. Zoe and Phoebe looked concerned about their mistress's state of mind. Back already, I see. He started. Since Percy won't be fully awake until tomorrow, I would like for you to stay near here. Wow, Percy, you're out like a light, snickered Nico. Percy glared at him and said, Shut up, D'Angelo. Nico smiled and waved for Kushina to start again. Kushina smiled at her stepson and continued. All right then. I am going to take a nap next to the big pine tree. Stay away from my daughter, thundered Zeus with his master bolt in his hands. Everyone just sighed then muttered, Drama queen, expect for Thales, because she was blushing and shouted, Daddy. See you later, Chiron, Clarice. And before Chiron could say anything, Naruto had ninja jumped up to the tree. Properly to warn us about Zeus' tantrums about his daughter dating Naruto, sighed Poseidon. Well, it's too late for that, smirked Hades. Well, if you ate cereal and didn't steal my precious core, then maybe Zeus wouldn't have freaked out as badly, hissed out Demeter. Enough woman about cereal, groaned Hades. No, cereal is nutritious and good for the soul, remarked Demeter. Everyone besides them had popcorn in hand and was watching this like a tennis match. The argument went back and forth for 10 minutes until Zeus shouted, Enough of his childish behavior. The others in the room whispered out, Speak for yourself. But likely Zeus didn't hear it, for if he did they would be getting an earful of it. Neither noticed that Clarice had quickly walked away with a small pink tint to her cheeks. I love you, my grandson, shouted out Aphrodite. Naruto arrived at the tree and sat down with his back to it. This tree had been pulling at him the whole time. The power of love, sighed Aphrodite. Please spare us, sighed Artemis. Well, I am sorry to rain on your parade, Ms. Ice Queen, snarled Aphrodite. Artemis growled and was about to pounce on the love goddess and rearrange her face. But Kushina started again, so she sat back onto her throne. He idly wondered if it was cursed or something like that. No, only a prison for little old me, smirked Thales. Slowly falling asleep, he laid his head against the tree and was out. Whenever he slept, he had dreams, but this was the most vivid dream he had ever had. That's not good, remarked Percy. He was in a large white room and he was not alone. Oh, my shining shoes, squealed Aphrodite. Not like that, mother, shouted Kushina. Girl, are you sure, daughter? Smirked Aphrodite. Yes, groaned Kushina. But before Aphrodite could speak again, Kushina began reading once more. Stood across from him, staring at him with shocked eyes. Ah, man, screamed Aphrodite. Kushina just smirked but said nothing and continued like she was never inspected. She has shoulder-length spiky black hair. Some whispers and looks went to Thales. And blue eyes, with freckles under her eyes. The whispers and looks increased even further. Mostly on the left, and she is wearing some punk-style clothes. Now everyone was looking at Thales, causing her to blush and look away from them. To him she looked beautiful. Thales blushed deeper and twiddled her fingers or playing with her black hair. Hey. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Who are you and where are we, as I know this can't be a dream? Oh, this is how you first met, how cute, squealed Aphrodite. Everyone in the room and on Olympus had to cover their ears unless threatened of being deaf. The girl gulped and said, Talia, and we are in limbo. Hey, I'm in the story now, cheered Thales and Talia. Kushina said, That's it, now it is time to fight Ares. Ares just grinned and said, Finally you're loose, girly. Alright, the chapter is over now. Kushina, are you ready? Questioned Athena. Kushina smiled and nodded her head excitedly. Let's get this started then, exclaimed Ares. who was starting drawing his sword from his sheath. But before they could charge at each other, Zeus thundered, "Stop!" The demigods with the other gods and goddesses looked at him in confusion. Zeus said, "We will be doing his in the arena," and transported everyone to the destination, the arena. As everyone got into their chairs, well, besides Hermes, Apollo, Ares, and Kushina. The first two were running a betting stand to see who would win the match. The first person who was picked was Annabeth, who picked Kushina because she is faster and maybe stronger than Ares. Then she said, "Ares has only strength and Kushina has that and wisdom to boot. So she has it in the bag," continued Annabeth. Apollo waved his hand and a small board said Kushina 1 and Ares 0. The gods focused on the floor because the fight was going to begin soon. "Are you two ready?" questioned Athena. The two nodded and Athena called out, "Now let the battle between Kushina Uzumaki and Ares begin." Artemis and Hestia were discussing if the hunters would want to see the fight. Artemis went last night and explained where Zoe and Phoebe were. So Artemis waved her hand so the hunters could see the fight. Meanwhile, Hestia sent a note telling Chiron to gather the campers and watch a fight between a demigod and Ares. Hestia also put in that they will be seeing it in an Iris message. At the hunters' camp, all the hunters were crowded near a fire to enjoy one another and to tell stories until a Iris message came into focus. When the image was clear enough to see through, it was their mistress standing there. All the girls bowed and said, "Milady." Artemis smiled at the girls and questioned, "Are you interested to watch a woman kicks Ares' ass?" The answer was obvious and all the girls said without hesitation, "Yes." Artemis nodded her head and the image went to the floor of the arena showing Ares and a beautiful red-haired woman. Some hunters pulled a face of disgust because thought it was Aphrodite, but the more experienced hunters said, it wasn't her. The other hunters' faces turned to emotionless and remained silent. At Camp Half-Blood, Chiron called out to the camp and said, "We have a treat because the gods allowed us to see a fight between a demigod and Ares." The campers looked at Chiron and was about to say something when a Iris message came into reality. It showed Thal sitting in a seat and Luke and Annabeth cried and shouted, "Talia." Then the image turned to the floor of the arena. There stood a beautiful red-haired woman that made all the girls envious. The woman smiled and the boys at camp to blush, even Chiron. Some of the boys at camp thought it was Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. But Chiron knew that the goddess changes forms to fit the person description of beauty, and this woman here did not change at all. Besides, the gods said it was a demigod that Lord Ares was facing, so he assumed that she was that demigod. "Hopeful it would not be too bloody because I don't want scared campers today," sighed Chiron. Then she flashed to her seat to see this upcoming battle with excitement in her gray eyes that was mirrored by her daughter. After everyone's betting was done, it was Kushina with 17 and Ares zip. "Begin fight. You want to give up, girly?" sneered Ares. Kushina smiled and questioned, "Did you say something?" Ares' face was blood red and glared murderously at Kushina. He said, "I was going to let you off easy, but not anymore." He pulled out his sword and shield, then grinned arrogantly. Kushina smirked, then pumped chakra into her legs and arms, then disappeared from sight. The gods were disappointed that they wouldn't get to see Kushina until the very end when she reappears. But suddenly a screen came out of nowhere with a note on it. It said, "Dear gods, goddesses, and demigods, this will let you see Kushina's moves in slow motion." The demigods with the hunters cheered, thinking, "This will be a good fight." While the gods and goddesses were nodding their heads in approval. While Hephaestus grinned and started to record this fight because he had a feeling that this fight would have great blackmail material. The screen turned on and they saw Kushina already aiming a kick at Ares' back. Which blow Ares a couple of feet. He grunted and looked around again and found her standing where she was before. He charged, but Kushina, having a speed advantage, dodged every one of his strikes. Ares roared, "Will you hold still?" Kushina smirked and teased, "Why can't you lay a finger on me?" which made Ares see red. Kushina jumped to the other side of the arena and started forming hand signs. She shouted out, "Sweden. Sodai Kaisaku no Jutsu. Water release." Great excavation technique. Water materialized around her hands, forming drills. This shocked all the demigods, goddesses, gods, Chiron, and hunters that were watching. She suddenly slammed her fist into the ground and formed a tsunami. Ares was too shocked to move and was hit by it. Finally, when the technique died down, there standing before them was a lake. Ares erupted from the lake to land on the solid ground. Ares' body was covered with scratches and having golden ichor dripping down to the ground below. Kushina said Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, shadow clone technique. Suddenly there was 5 copies of Kushina standing besides the real one. All 5 of them disappeared and started using Ares as a punching bag, because as soon as he went one way he went another. Finally all 5 of the clones kicked him up in the air. He went up 10 feet until he saw the real Kushina just above him. She smiled evilly and axe kicked him into the ground. Here he stood there trying to get back up. Finally, after what felt like entirety later, Ares was standing on shaky legs and he heard Kushina's voice say to him, "Never let your opponent get behind you." Kushina formed the tiger sign and coldly said, "This will hurt you more than it will hurt me. But if you touch my son, this beating will feel like a walk in park. You got me," hissed out Kushina. Ares nodded his head and Kushina grinned. "Oh, by the way, this technique I will be performing on you might cause constipation, pain and/or embarrassment," said Kushina. Ares paled while the crowd became impatient on what Kushina was about to do. She cackled evilly and hissed out, "Kanahagakure Hiden Taijutsu Ogi, Senin Garashi, Kanahagakure's most secret and sacred technique." Smiley face. Ares flew and screamed at the top of his lungs, "Yo!" Everyone face-palmed while Hermes, Apollo, Hephaestus, who was by far the loudest, laughed at Ares' predicament. Hephaestus smiled and thanked his lucky stars that he recorded that. Ares finally landed in a heap, unconscious, traumatized by what he had to endure. "The winner is Kushina," shouted out Athena. The iris messages faded from existence like it never was there to begin with. The gods, demigods, and goddesses went into the throne room once more. Ares of course had to come into a stretcher, and of course everyone was laughing at Ares' unconscious form. As soon as Kushina walked into the throne room, Athena and Annabeth run to her and demanded to start learning seals. Kushina grinned but said, "As soon as we take another break I will be giving you a book on seals." Athena and Annabeth pouted and asked, "Why?" Kushina answered back, "Because if I gave you the book now you would be too absorbed into that book rather than the book about my son." Athena and Annabeth sighed but agreed with her. They waited for 2 more minutes for everyone to get here. Everyone went into the throne room and Kushina picked up the book and shouted out, "Who wants to read?" "I will," answered Percy. Kushina passed the book to him, then gave him a warm smile, which he smiled back. Percy opened and turned to the right page in the book and started, Chapter 6, Bloodlines Are Like Gods. "There?" questioned the gods and goddesses while looking at Kushina. "The title is not done yet," answered Percy. "Not? Oh," blushed the gods and goddesses. "Now hold on. I know I am not dead. All I did was fall asleep against your tree, as people call it. So stay away from her then." Zeus snarled at the book. Thales just shook her head and hoped her dad would stop soon. The others in the room just chuckled at Zeus' protectiveness. Naruto said, a bit panicked in this situation, "Your guess is as good as mine. Properly, because he is a son of Hades, he could cross into limbo," said Athena. The gods and goddesses nodded their heads because it did make sense to them. While the demigods were looking at Nico and questioned him about if he went into limbo. The answer they got was no. Talia shrugged. "Anyway, you know my name, but I don't know yours." "Of course, Pinecone Face, you are famous around camp because they named a tree after you," teased Percy. The throne room erupted into laughter while Artemis and her hunters were glaring at Percy for teasing one of their sisters. Talia and Thal's Death glared at Percy but blushed with all the attention she was getting. "Oh, my name is Naruto Uzumaki and apparently I am a demigod." "No honey, a demi-deity," said Kushina. The gods looked at Kushina in confusion but she said, "It's in the book." The gods and goddesses sighed but focused on the book again. Naruto replied, calming down and walking up to shake hand with her. Was his hand soft? Questioned Aphrodite. Thals blushed but nodded her head and Aphrodite giggled. Nice to meet you, Naruto. Talia said with a smile as she sent electricity up his arm. Feeling his arm go numb. Ah, that what love feels like, screamed Aphrodite. Nico cringed and whispered to Percy, if that is what love feels like, then I really don't want to fall in love. Percy laughed at Nico's statement but was silenced by Annabeth's and Aphrodite's glare. Which, being the brave strong hero he was, gulped and prayed to anything in particular to save him. Naruto said, I take it you are a demigod too. No, she is a goddess in a white room with you, joked Apollo. Artemis snapped and exclaimed, shut the Tartarus up. So, whose kid are you? Mine, now stay away, thundered Zeus with lightning flashed and lightened up the sky. Poseidon with the other gods and goddesses shouted out, calm down, O mighty god Theaters. Zeus shot a death glare at both his brothers for beginning and encouraging his family on saying it. Talia scowled a bit and said, Zeus. You. Hades, grumbled Zeus. The blonde rose an eyebrow but didn't say much to her scowling. Not a clue, same for Percy. He arrived here with me and a satyr named Grover. I bet she freaks out like always, laughed Percy and Nico. Talia and Thals glared at the two boys, then shocked both Nico and Percy. Talia got Nico while Thals got Percy. See, I told you I never want to fall in love because it gets you burned, screamed out a smoking Nico. His black hair was standing on ends and would make a funny picture. So Kushina, being the prankster she is, took a picture while Hermes grinned, then put his thumbs up for his full approval. Grover. See, choked out a deep-fried Percy courtesy from Thals. Which she shocked again for the fun of it while Percy screamed like a little girl. Both daughter of Zeus smiled at both the smoking boys. Yeah, you've heard of him. Naruto said as he back up from her outburst. He was the satyr who found me, Annabeth, and Luke. Luke? Sadly thought Annabeth looking down.